I'm so glad to see you all. I do understand that the parking gate was not opened by parking services, so we may have some stragglers coming in. If you see them at the door hovering, just say, come on in, all right? Elaine is happy to have that, very happy. So I want to welcome you to URI and to our celebration of Crossing Borders, Women Writing Their Lives. I'm Jody Lisberger. I am the Director of Women's Studies here and also a published writer. I am honored and thrilled to be here today to introduce Elaine Orr. Before I introduce her, I have a few announcements and thanks. I want to remind you to put on your calendars the 2 remaining author visits that we have. On March 29th, and here's the poster that you will see, this is Nancy McCabe, who will be here to read from her new book, Crossing the Blue Willow Bridge, A Journey to My Daughter's Birthplace in China. So this is Sophie when she was born and one of Nancy's earlier books, and then she has just written a new book that's forthcoming about taking this marvelous person back to China to find her orphanage and her caretakers and see her people. So Nancy will be here to share with us her experience of crossing borders. And then on April 12th, another prize-winning writer, Beth Taylor, will be here to read from and discuss her book, The Plain Language of Love and Loss. Like Elaine, both of these writers have courageously crossed borders in terms of their lives and their memoirs. Nancy, in detailing the experience of being a single mother who adopts a Chinese baby, Sophie, and then journeys back to China with her, and Beth, in sharing her experience growing up in a Quaker family during the Vietnam War and facing the suicide of her 14-year-old brother. So please go to the URI homepage where you can click on Women's History, or you can go to the Women's Studies website events page, and you can click on their books to get excerpts if you're not purchasing the book. These events will all take place here again from 4:45 to 6. Books are also available. Gail, thank you. Liz, thank you so much for being here. Thank Gail for me as well. She's not here today. But the books are available in the URI bookstore, and they're also available here, and I know that Elaine would be thrilled to sign your book after her talk. I want you also to know about 2 flyers that are out on the table when you're exiting. One is for the Crossing Borders series, and the other one is for the Ocean State Summer Writing Conference, which welcomes writers of all genres and levels to hone their craft, take workshops, go to readings, and network with writers. The conference will be this June from the 23rd to the 25th. It's featuring several outstanding writers and teachers, including the newly prize-winning Jennifer Egan, Robert Stone, and Tomas Salomon. So this should be a fabulous event. We hope you will sign up for it and come. I also need to give my thanks to the many people who make this event possible. So I want to thank Rich, the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, and Sue Ellen Kroll, the Honors Program, and Rick McIntyre and Deb Gardner, Winnie Brownell, and the College of the College of Arts and Sciences, Lynn McKinney, and the College of Human Science and Services, and to various other departments. Come right in and have a seat. I know these people don't mind. It's great to see you. To other departments who have given support, and these departments would be Lynn Derbyshire in Communication Studies, Trish Marikoff in Psychology, Libby Miles in Writing and Rhetoric, C.B. Peters in Sociology and Anthropology, and Marie Schwartz, who is here, standing up there, in History. I want to thank immensely my office manager, Deb Messner, who kindly took my parking card out to help people in through the parking lot. She'll be back, along with Jen Brandt, my fabulous TA, graduate TA, and Erica Munoz, my work study student. In addition, I'm grateful to the President's Office, to Market and Publicity. That would be Cindy Sabato, Jan Wenzel, Jody Redlick, Nikki Toller, and also thanks to Tim Tierney and Anibal here, the wizards of video and audio, who are here to make sure that everything works. And those of you who haven't heard me before know also that I give great thanks to our students of all ages who inspire us to keep seeking, questioning, and writing. Now to the pleasure of introducing, come on in, now to, oh, it's Mike. Now to the pleasure of introducing Elaine Orr. Award-winning writer of nonfiction, fiction, and poetry, professor of English from North Carolina State University, and MFA faculty on the brief residency MFA in Writing program at Spalding University, Elaine Orr is someone whose writing and teaching speaks to the many borders she crosses and knows. Elaine received her PhD at Emory University and her MA with a concentration in creative writing and Henry James from the University of Louisville. She is the author of several books and articles on feminist criticism, American women's fictions, post-colonialism, Tilly Olson, Marge Piercy, Eudora Welty, Sarah Orne Jewett, and Joan Didion. She is also in the midst of the final drafts, or she hopes it's the final drafts, of a novel called The Writing Box, based on the pre-Civil War diary of an early missionary to Nigeria. But most importantly, for our event today, Elaine gives us the chance to explore what it means to have the courage to cross borders and know intimately the deepest and most compelling ways history, war, place, and the body intersect. Elaine's experience and witness in writing her memoir, Gods of Noonday, A White Girl's African Life, opens up these many crossings. In writing that is rich, provocative, sophisticated, honest, daringly juxtaposed, and at times searing, and at times very funny, Elaine explores the poles of bicultural identity, the depths of facing a kidney transplant, the blindness toward the Biafran War, or the protection from it for children, the complications of being brought up in a missionary experience, the role of the spirit, and the crossings of public and private, home and not home, life and death. Most profoundly, she reopens for us her deepest loyalty, which is to Nigeria. Nigeria is the place of my hidden self that is truer than my public self, she writes. It is the country of my heart. But having left Nigeria and Yoruba land long ago, she continues, and having remained absent from my holy land, I have become broken. Please join me in welcoming this extraordinary Elaine Orr, who invites us to think about coming back together and about, in the most profound ways, our own country of our hearts. Elaine, thank you for coming today.
Okay. Let's see if I can get technically savvy. How's that? Wow, you don't even need that from me, do you? I'm going to get loud. No, this is good. Is it good? Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to put this here, and I hope I don't pull it off. So I'm Elaine Orr. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon on this beautiful Rhode Island day when you might have thought of something else to do. It's gorgeous and it's wonderful to be up here. I've just had the grandest experience visiting one of Jody's classes and with some high school students from which, oh yeah, they were great. We had a marvelous time. And before I really get started, I want to maybe repeat, but you can't say it often enough, thanks to many of the people who've made not just my event, but this whole series possible. And first of all, of course, Jody Lisberger, right? Yeah. Who is so brilliantly teaching here at URI and who's directing women's studies and who doesn't have enough to do apparently. So she's inventing things like this marvelous symposium on crossing borders, women writing their lives. I'm so grateful that she selected me to come and be with you. I'd also like to thank the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities and Sue Ellen Kroll. I may not say all of these names correctly, but if you're out there, you know who you are, and I'm grateful. One reason we can't say thanks enough right now is that there are all these budget cuts around the country, right? And when people are supporting education and they're supporting writing and they're supporting the arts, then we want them to hear us loud and clear. How grateful we are that they're supporting what is really life, right? Yeah. What is essential to life, along with bread. Yeah. I'd like to thank the honors program, Rick McIntyre and Deb Gardner, Dean Winnie Brownell, and the College of Arts and Sciences, Lynn McKinney and the College of Human Science and Services, Lynn Derbyshire in Communication Studies, Trish Morikoff in Psychology, Libby Miles in Writing and Rhetoric, C.B. Peters, I don't know if any of these people are here, but I'm sending a cheer out to you, in Sociology and Anthropology, Marie Schwartz in History, Deb Messner in Women's Studies, and Mike. Is it Yefko, who, okay, so he's married to the wonderful Jody Lisberg, among other things, Lisberger. But in the past 2 days, he has cooked for me and chauffeured me about and been a marvelous companion and new friend. Yeah, and has made being here so interesting. I've just gotten to see all of his art and all of his wonderful things that he's doing in his house. So thank you, Mike. You've been essential to the success of my being here. If it's a success, and I hope it is. So, what can I say after that marvelous introduction? I was born in Nigeria. My parents were Southern Baptist missionaries. I was afraid to say that most of my life. It wasn't a story I thought worthy of telling. Actually, in my first 16 years, which I lived primarily in Nigeria, it wasn't a life that I thought was extraordinary. As I was saying in the class that just met, I thought the world was Nigeria. I was born there. So my view of the world was that it was almost entirely Africans, right? I was in a town of 30,000 people, and there were about 20 white people. So in my view, the world was black. White people were not even really enough people to be a minority. We were this sort of odd breed. And so that was the world I knew and the world I came into, and didn't have any other experience until I was 6 years old. And my parents took a furlough, and we showed up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I got sent to first grade, okay? And so I felt like I needed sunglasses. Everything was so white and bright, and the church we went to was so white. I was used to, a beautiful mud church and beautiful brown grass at Christmas time, and all these beautiful earth tones, and suddenly I was in this sort of bright, sparkling world that seemed to me entirely veneer. It was my first experience with television, and so that was sort of a metaphor, I guess, for my early experience, was America was on television. It was sort of not a real world. It was a bit like Disneyland. It was a place you would go to but not stay. I'm feeling the need to sort of make a little movement over to my purse. I don't know if it's the Rhode Island air, but I'm needing a Kleenex. This is going to be on YouTube, but there are human needs that people have. Thank you, that's wonderful. See how Jody's always prepared. Yeah, and then when I came to the U.S. To live, when I was 16, I was sent here. My parents were still in Nigeria being missionaries, and I was sent here to finish high school. My theory is that we were sent 2 years before college to sort of shake Africa out of us, to sort of shake out that foreigner, right? We weren't foreign to ourselves, but we were to the white U.S. world we were coming into, and then maybe we'd be ready for college in a couple of years. Well, I wasn't, and I dropped out of school. I was still in culture shock. And it wasn't really until sort of the end of my college career that I began to acclimate a bit to the United States, and to feel like this was where I would probably stay for my adult life. But let me talk just a little bit about sort of in your imagination, or in my imagination, what it meant to grow up in Nigeria and why that's such a big deal. If you think about yourself, right, where you grew up, all of the fundamental sensory experiences of your childhood are the ones that last, right? The first time you smelled baking bread, the first time you ate whatever food your mother cooked, the first time you watched a hibiscus open, all of those early memories, they're so ingrained in us. They're so fundamental to our being. And in my way of thinking, they're who we are spiritually. They're so deep in us. They're our ground. I mean, our literal ground. That's how we know who we are, by that early world that surrounds us. And so when I go to write, where do I want to be? I want to be in Nigeria. All of my writing comes out of Nigeria. The first poem that I published was about a river in Nigeria, which is central to the book that I wrote 20 years later when I wrote the story of my life. So, and as I was saying in the class that I was just talking with, my parents were missionaries. I'm not Southern Baptist anymore, but you can have a spiritual life, right, and not be. In fact, that might be the way to get one. Anyway, I had a very strong sense of God's presence in Africa. And when I came to the U.S., I didn't so much have that feeling. So this move, this border crossing, which was not chosen by me, it was chosen by my parents' career and by what they imagined their daughter would become, was very disruptive in my psyche. But because I had been raised to believe that this was how my life would be, I didn't quite know how deep the rupture was. You see, do you all see where I'm going here? In other words, I think if my parents were Yoruba, Yoruba land is the area of Nigeria that I grew up in, and if I had been a Yoruba girl and had come to the U.S., everyone would have expected me to have difficulty in the transition. But because I was a white girl, my parents thought in coming to the U.S., I was coming home. No way was I coming home. I was coming to a foreign country. Yeah. And so, as I said this afternoon in the class before this lecture talk we're having right now, this, I hope, conversation in a little bit, I knew what was coming, but I wasn't prepared. There wasn't any way to get prepared. And so it really took a long time for me to understand what had happened to me. And what really focused me and what really pulled this story out of me was that I found myself in my early 40s facing end-stage renal disease. And that experience gave me a great deal of focus, and I began to contemplate my life and to understand that the one thing I had to do was write the story of my life. As I said earlier today, I thought I was writing it to explain myself to other people, but I found out I was writing it to discover who I was. And that's what really happens when you write a memoir. You really discover yourself. And I think maybe that's what happens if you're involved in any deep commitment to art of any sort. You discover yourself in the process. And then if you have an opportunity to share it with the world, I mean, wow, that's fantastic. And that's what's happening now today with you. Let me see if I'm anywhere near where I meant to be in terms of my outline. So actually I am. You know, the question of memoir is, who am I? And I've already begun to give you the answer, right? I'm confused. That's where I was for a while. And my husband lovingly knew that I was confused, and he's even been charming enough to say that he married me for that reason. One thing I like to comment on, to some of you are writers, all of you I hope are readers, is that we don't really know our life until we contemplate it. We've lived it, but we're in such a rush, right? But that in actually writing it, I began to discover who I was, and I began to conjure my past and to put it on the page. So I'd like to read just very, very briefly a couple of things out of the memoir, and then I'm going to read in a little bit something new that I've written, which is also about my Nigerian life, but it's new work. So first here, I was talking about early experiences of the world, right? Those things that stay so close to us. My true alphabet was found outdoors, in fruits and flowers, in dry grass and sandy roads, in the shapes of trees and the wiriness of the grasshopper. I remember with love the sight of dry season grass meeting the road. Because the grass, like the sand, was a light, almost transparent brown, this meeting was observable not in terms of hue, but of texture. The stubble of grass, the silkiness of packed sand. I learned from the frangipani trees that beauty is fragile and not to be trusted. The limbs look sturdy enough, but they break easily, exuding a sticky white substance. And the flowers are so sweet to smell they give you headaches. Palm trees, on the other hand, bend almost to the ground in a storm but do not break. But they are also unattainable, their limbs high as the hawk's. Nigerian men climb them with a contrivance of rope to collect the fruit and trim the fronds, a feat I never saw a white man attempt. Okay, and then very briefly, I want to read a paragraph about this river, the Ethiop River, where I swam as a girl. Can you all still hear me? Okay, I like to refer to this as my swimsuit cover. Yeah, I don't think I'll have another one. Anyway, my father took this photograph when I was about 10 years old, and if you look carefully at the book cover, you'll see that there's a plank missing on that pier. And I love that because it's like the missing link in my life. You know, it's what I had to write, it's what I had to find when I wrote this book. It just, and it's so wonderful when you're doing research for your memoir, whether it's in your family photographs or it's in the library or you're reading other people, you just keep getting clues. It's like you're on a treasure hunt, right, to find yourself. And so when I found this photograph and I saw that missing step, I thought, you know, there it is. There's the missing, that's what I'm after, what I haven't yet seen. Okay, but what I did see was the Ethiop River. The Ethiop was a river beyond poetry, iridescent, the water clear as glass, its white sandy bed interrupted at certain depths by rich green river grasses that swayed like the village women dancing. Depending on the angle and time of day, the river's colors were green and more green, a fluffy white like cotton from the kapok tree, the blue of the woodland kingfisher, or granite beneath a threatening sky. At certain times of year, white lilies with yellow centers ornamented the water's edge. This was a river lovelier than the diamonds of Sierra Leone, lovelier than the gold of this country, Nigeria, lovelier than the king stools of Ghana, lovelier than any of us who bathed in it. So now I want to do something very startling and take off my sweater. I'm just, working up, this is work, reading. Yeah. Okay. Great. You can try this at home. All right. So, all roads began in Nigeria, and all roads lead back to Nigeria. Yeah, in my imagination. And all stories begin in Nigeria, right? God begins in Nigeria. It's where I am centered, even now at age 57. So, as I said, when I became ill, I felt compelled to write this story. And I do want to read just briefly. I had end-stage renal disease. And this story, this memoir, while it's primarily about all the borders I crossed as a girl, moving about within Nigeria. We didn't live in just one place. We moved quite a bit. Moving back and forth on furlough to the United States and then back to Nigeria. I crossed the Atlantic 6 times before I was 16. I moved 15 times before I was 15. So there were lots of crossings, yeah. And, but the border, this sort of interesting, if you'll stay with me here for a moment, the thing that happened in terms of the theme of border crossing that I want to mention when I had end-stage renal disease, some of you may know this, but your sort of internal plumbing breaks, right? And you do dialysis. Have any of you had experience with loved ones or family or friends who've been on dialysis? Well, what happens, is that you have to sort of externalize your kidney function. It's not inside your body anymore. So the boundary of the body is broken, which is very traumatic for that to happen. We think of our bodies as having integrity, right, as working. I mean, even if you've broken a bone, you see that bone sticking out, right? It's not supposed to be there that way. So I just want to read one short passage here about dialysis. I don't guess we could get a chair up here for me, could we? Sure. You all are going to ad-libbing as we go. Oh, look, this is wonderful. Thank you. And that won't matter, right? Because I've got this. And how about for you? Are you good? Okay. I'm really keeping. So let me mention this to make this clear. I began writing my memoir knowing that I was heading toward end-stage renal disease. I knew that. That's why I was compelled to write it at the particular point in life that I did, and I took the time to do it instead of something else, right? Instead of the next, can you hear me?
Yes, fine.
Okay. Instead of the next scholarly book or the next thing that would get me promoted, write this book about my life. And as I was writing it and as I was revising it and sending it out, I, in fact, did face end-stage renal disease, and I began to do dialysis. So then I had to sort of put the dialysis into the book because it was part of what was going on in my life. So that's why it's here, and I just want to read this one passage. When I finished my dialysis this morning, I saw that the drain bag had a small hole in it. Can you hear me? The mic has moved. The mic is unhappy with my movement. Yeah.
It's okay now.
Okay, it's working.
It's great.
Okay, Jody, if it starts to move, let me know. When I finished my dialysis this morning, I saw that the drain bag had a small hole in it because it was leaking all over the living room rug, staining a good half of it. I can't imagine that the rug can be saved. Still, I tried, first putting down old towels and sopping up as much liquid as I could, and then taking them upstairs to the bath and squeezing the towels out and rinsing them, then sitting some moments out of exhaustion and nausea, and then going back down for more of the same. The solution has a smell, not really like urine, but a kind of spoiled, sweet smell. Sometimes my son's friends come into the room while I'm hooked to the bags. I refuse to isolate myself 4 times a day, though this is what the dialysis manual tells me to do. Go into a room and close it, close all the windows and vents, mask myself and anyone else in the room, and so on. I refuse. So his friends see me with a tube mysteriously extending out from under my clothes, and this yellowish liquid filling up the bag on the floor, and they do not know what to think. I am sure they are disgusted. I do not try to explain. It is too hard. And then again, it is disgusting. So that was my personal war, I guess. Jody introduced me in terms of the subject of war that I was fighting as I was trying to write this book. And I did get 2 transplants about 10 years ago, a pancreas and a kidney. And I'm getting to write more books and more articles. And I'm getting to come here and visit you at URI, which is fantastic. So the other war that Jody was alluding to was when it was happening, when I was in Nigeria. It was called the Biafran War. It's now generally in history books discussed as the Nigerian Civil War. It happened that I was born in 1954 in Nigeria, which was the year that the Constitution was written that would lead to the Federation of Nigeria, or to the Republic of Nigeria, excuse me. I went to first grade the year that Nigeria gained its independence. I went to boarding school the year that the first coup occurred, which would lead to the Nigerian Civil War. And I remained in Nigeria throughout the war, and I left the year after the war. So my coming of age coincided with the last of the colonial period in Nigeria, independence, and then civil war. And so that's part of the arc, that's part of the material with which I structure this book. And there's a great lamentation in the book over the Civil War and the way in which it touched me, in the people I knew. There's also a lamentation in the book about the ways in which I was shielded from the war, and I didn't understand its cost at the time. And the ways that I was sort of not allowed to understand what was happening, because I was an American girl. I was going to be delivered from Nigeria at some point, according to the plan. It didn't really happen that way, because you can't really take, let's see, what does what's that famous, trying to think. Well, I'm going to paraphrase a great writer whose name I can't remember at the moment, and I'm going to say it in my own way, okay? I'm going to borrow it and make it mine. You can take a girl out of Nigeria, but you can't take Nigeria out of the girl. Yeah, and so that could be anything, you know. You can take Rhode Island, you can take the girl out of Rhode Island, but you can't take Rhode Island out of the girl, whatever the home is. So this plan, this wonderful plan my parents had, didn't quite work. And so when I came back to write my life story, I spent a great deal of time doing research so that I could understand where my life was in relation to the national story of this country, which I was claiming spiritually. Because, you know, we can't, I don't think, I don't think it's quite fair or responsible or something to claim a country as your spiritual home if you're not going to know about it politically, right? If you're not going to know the cost to it, to the country, of the history you lived through. I mean, that was my decision. If I was going to say, as I do in this book, I'm a Nigerian girl, if I was going to say this is my spiritual homeland, I had to know what had happened while I was there. And a lot happened. Oil was discovered. Seismographers came onto the Baptist mission compound looking for oil. They found it, you know. Palm oil had been the great export from Nigeria. Now it was crude oil. It ruined the country, the economy. Not that a few people didn't become very wealthy, right? Nigeria is our fifth source of petroleum here in the United States. Yeah, so I have a particular responsibility to Nigeria, but I might suggest we all do. We're all participating, right, in oil. Yeah, and it has so much to do with how we're living and global politics. So, I'm going to read something. I'm going to get a little more. I was really funny last hour, so I want to get back to being a little more funny, so you all won't think I'm just dead serious about everything. I think what I'm going to do now is, well, let me make one or two more comments about Gods of Noonday. I mentioned in the class that I was visiting this afternoon that getting to teach at a university has really been a ground for me as in my American life. I really feel that, you know, when people will come and talk to me, when my students come to class, that I really have a place to belong in this country. It's the thing that's most important to me here, teaching. But writing this book was the means by which I got back home. It was the raft that carried me back across the Atlantic Ocean. And it's been, you know, out of that sort of return that I was able to undertake in this book that I've embarked on a creative writing career, and that I've written a novel, that I've written lots of short stories and published them, and other essays, some of which you can find online if you'd like. And so I'm going to read now an essay that I've written recently that's going to give you a lot of the themes of my life that I've already talked about. Are you all familiar with the writer Flannery O'Connor? Yeah, she's a good Southern writer, right? Flannery O'Connor said, if you survive childhood, you have enough to write about for the rest of your life. So, you know, you can keep writing about your childhood in lots of different manifestations. Now, are you all hearing me now? I think this little thing is sort of moving about. It's got a life of its own. Yeah. Oops. Hi. Okay, is this good? Because we're going to sit in here for just a minute. All right, so one of the sort of quintessential experiences of an American coming of age is learning to drive, right? Okay, well, I'm going to give you learning to drive in Nigeria. Yeah. Okay. But you're also going to get some of Arkansas in here. And this is part of the border crossing, okay? So there's going to be a lot of coming and going in this short excerpt, the short essay, which is titled Driving the Peugeot. Yeah. Oh, and this is written in second person. So if you really want to have some fun writing memoir, try writing in second or third person. You get away with more. Yeah. Okay. That was the summer you learned to drive the Peugeot. Your father taught you on the undulating roads of that monstrous compound, large enough for a military base, but it wasn't that at all. Instead, a hospital compound and a seminary and all the staff and faculty houses and lots of open land. The car still smelled new after 5 years, plastic still on the seats. In the middle of his workday, your father came home for lunch and you practiced. Letting your left foot off that tight clutch slowly enough was the main thing. And accelerating opposingly and equally with the right foot, a kind of mechanical dance, or the car would lurch and the engine die. You caught on quickly, robbing the young man who worked in the kitchen of his entertainment. He had hoped to laugh at you a good while, several days, maybe most of the week. Meanly, but openly, as Nigerian young men had been laughing at you all of your life. Marry me, they'd not say, and you felt so white and flat-chested. Your family's house was one of the newer ones. Only much later would you learn that it was fashioned like the houses on the University of Nigeria campus in Nsukka in Igbo land. You weren't there. You were in Yoruba land, in the huge town of Abomishaw on the other side of the Niger River. The Nigerian Civil War had just ended, so the beautiful campus of the University of Nigeria was in ruins, and its beautiful poet, Christopher Okigbo, was dead. But none of that was in your story at the time. You were learning to drive the Peugeot, and the young man Isaac was watching from his wooden bench in the shade of the umbrella tree, but not getting much of a show. Instead, you were learning to back up, shift into first gear and then second, and off you went with your father, a light dusting of sand, lifting behind the Peugeot like the bridal gown of a ghost. The car itself was a 404 sedan, 1965 model, cream-colored, with the manual transmission on the column and a sweep speedometer, and that sleek and fitting image of a lion positioned dead center on the car's grille. Peugeot made its entry into Nigeria in the mid-1950s when about 100 of the 403 model were imported. The Peugeot was so reliable on Nigeria's roads, its legend spread like a national anthem. That very summer, Automobile Peugeot of France made a proposal to Nigeria to create a manufacturing plant, and it was approved. If your family ever owned a finer car, you certainly never had one that retained its pristine quality longer. So it was still a marvelous car for your father to park in front of the house you lived in that summer, the house so like others at the destroyed University of Nigeria in Nsukka. All of those houses were reminiscent of the brick ranches fashionable in the United States in the mid-60s. You walked into the living room, and adjoining was the dining area. Down a hallway were all the bedrooms together and a bath, and in the other direction was the kitchen and a breakfast nook. Except The Nigerian houses were made of concrete brick and painted beautiful pastel colors inside. And there were lots and lots of windows for ventilation and light, and they were all louvered. And in the night, when storms came, it was your father with his flashlight who got up and turned the handle that shut them against the rain, though the smell could not be contained. The smell of the rain was in the room like the breath of the living God. After the driving lessons, your father often rode his bicycle back to work, and you were allowed to drive the car around the compound. Sometimes you chauffeured your mother to see a friend, but often she did her work at home in her study, where she wrote lessons for the Women's Missionary Union of the Baptist Church. Or she worked with Mrs. Adibempe, the seamstress, on the next season's wardrobe, or she received guests. You didn't leave the compound because you didn't have a Nigerian license. It didn't matter. The compound was huge, and you loved driving it. Nights were best, of course. Driving down to visit a friend at the far end of the compound, past teak trees, the moon up, the road reddish gray in the dim light, the windows down, the surprising cool of African nights beneath the nights during the rainy season, even at the equator, breezes lifting from the ground like air coming off a lake. What would it have felt like naked? You never knew. You and your sister had come for the summer, she the college student, you having just completed 11th grade in Arkansas. The summer before had been your last in Nigeria as a growing up girl born in this country to American missionaries. You and she were back visiting your parents in the same house you had shared with them before you got sent to their home, but not yours, the USA. It was oddly precious being back home. Your room just as you had left it, with white ceramic cap on the headboard of your bed, and the pink and orange curtains you had fashioned with your mother 2 years earlier out of fabric from the market. The Nigerian-made record player in the maroon case you played your records on. In the 10th grade, your last Nigerian year, you had listened to the White Album by the Beatles. But now it was naturally by Three Dog Night, the song Joy to the World, with the lyric Jeremiah was a bullfrog. It all made sense. It was madness. That year in Arkansas, for example, joining the pep squad, what you really wanted to be was a cheerleader, but there was no way you were going to get that. Cheerleading was like horseback riding. You had to be bred for it. It wasn't something you started at 17. And anyway, tryouts had happened the year before. Right away, you should have known America was impossible. You couldn't join up this late. You were out of the running. But you tried, which is something Nigerians like to say when you haven't succeeded. It's a sentence of pity. You tried, they would say, when you spoke a few words of halting Yoruba in church and felt proud of yourself. You tried in the pep squad, wearing the short red romper over the white blouse with those necklaces made of itsy bitsy beads you'd strung to be like every other white girl who had any hope. You grew your hair long and carried those skinny red pom-poms that were no competition at all for the boisterously full gold pom-poms the cheerleaders shook down on the field while they were kicking their legs up to heaven. Every Thursday night of the fall months, you baked a delectable treat for a football player whose name had been given to you. The idea was to deliver it to his locker at the high school early Friday morning before he arrived, never leaving your name, only placing the gift there neatly wrapped in foil, like a sacrifice left at the shrine of a minor god. You were the nameless, faceless eunuch in the palace of football. And you drank it in because it was what you could have. It was what you could do to have any place in Arkansas. You went with the girlfriends that gained you to see Three Dog Night in Little Rock, and it was one of the most agonizing nights of your life. Your head nearly broke with the noise. And your friends leaving you to go drink beer, never asking you to join them because they knew you were too naive to know how to behave properly. Though you had witnessed Nigerian initiations of boys into manhood, and the boys were whipped, and the women ululated, and it went on for hours in the sun, nothing you had ever experienced was so damaging to your senses as this. There seemed a reason for the initiation. What reason was there for the violence of a rock concert? You could not even make out the preposterous lyrics. Driving the Peugeot was the sanest thing you did that summer back in Nigeria. You had arrived unceremoniously, taking that initial step out of the cool interior of the airplane at the Lagos airport onto the deck of the movable stairway into the pelting heat and humidity of that coastal city. You were wearing a lavender two-piece outfit made of some horrible knit fabric and a scarf which only made your face look rounder and bloated. And then you missed your first step and fell most of the way down, tearing your pale pantyhose to shreds. You had just glimpsed your father on the other side of the fence that skirted the tarmac before you fell. A year before, you had left him, your father, in that same spot, leaning into the wind, and you had imagined or hoped he was so grief-stricken he could barely stand. And now he was trying mightily to get to you, to help you up. But the Civil War had recently concluded. You couldn't anymore, as once you could in the olden days, as your father said, just walk willy-nilly onto the tarmac. There were rules now, and people got shot for disobeying, or appearing to disobey, or really for no reason at all. So you picked yourself up, so disappointed, after all you had done to appear normal and whole and happy, coming from America to visit your parents. Perhaps learning to drive the Peugeot made something up to your father for falling down those steps. Perhaps it started that way, but then it was something for you. Those brief jaunts into the night, the sexiest you ever were in Nigeria. You had a kind of power behind the wheel, exploring the compound roads alone. The air brought goosebumps, almost like being kissed. No one really knew how long you were out. What could happen? You always got home by 10. Occasionally you would see a Nigerian man walking, his robes fluttering in a night breeze, or a missionary doctor with his flashlight leaving the compound late, or a woman seller with loads in her head who had cut through the compound. Perhaps she had dashed the gatekeeper with a bit of roasted meat. What was it you desired in those weeks at home, after Arkansas, after the Nigerian Civil War, back with your family with fewer days than those beads on those silly necklaces you had strung? What were you thinking between Three Dog Night and dieting, which is what you did a lot of that summer, and driving the Peugeot, and waking later in the night to rain, and your father closing the louvered windows, but the smell already wrapping you, carrying you back to earliest memory? A photograph was made midsummer. In it, you sit with your sister on a bench between two young Nigerian men. Your skirt is short. And to keep your underwear from showing, you've cradled your hands in your lap. Even with a diet, your face is a little rounded, but your hair is pulled back becomingly, and there's a half smile on your face. What could you see that the photograph doesn't show? Was there something you looked forward to later in the day? Did you feel some warmth toward the young man next to you? In the photograph, it's apparent how handsome he was. Surely you weren't yet thinking of returning to Arkansas and leaving your parents behind. You look a little dreamy, as if perhaps you've convinced yourself you won't leave. You'll lose so much weight you'll float away. The day you're to drive with your sister and parents back to Lagos and the airport, they'll look for you, but you'll be gone. Summer was the season of firing the land to clear it for next year's planting. Summer was not the season of firing the land to clear it for next year's planting, nor the period of harmattan when dust filled the air and chilled the morning temperatures. Instead, it was the time of ripe fruit and cassava growing fat underground. It should have been your ripening time. You were 17, but you had no thoughts for any actual boy that summer, and very little thought of the future. Where could a future occur? If you went into town your mother drove, you went several places in Abomashaw that summer, and all of them seemed more bush than the Nigeria you had left only a year earlier. Your parents, for example, had abandoned the anglicized church across the compound where only English was used, and joined a town church where Yoruba was in full force. The benches had no backs, the floor was packed dirt, the concrete walls didn't seem quite in alignment. The same with the little grocery you visited. Before, you had gone to a grocery in the city of Abaddon, where there were skyscrapers and a bona fide university. The little store in Abomashaw occupied a mud house, and your eyes had to adjust before you could make out the dusty cans of tuna fish and tomato paste. Just outside, a woman had her fire and fried akara while the children waited. In an odd way, your mother seemed more at home in Africa than you ever remembered, as if she was just sinking into the land after 20 years, while you had been ejected and was becoming an American, accustomed to white bathrooms and cream-colored hosiery and washing your hair every night. You were a little in awe of your mother and how comfortable she was in these places. She strode into the store in her dark glasses, her hair held back in a scarf. It seemed you had missed something altogether, some full maturation into your Africanness, and she was getting to have it instead. You studied the trees, watching the pawpaw ripen. The mango trees grow dense and threatening in their great canopies. The higher irocos rise stately like giraffes. And you did not think, because thinking meant awareness, and awareness meant knowing how short were the weeks before again you must pack your bags, not this time for an inspecific America, but for a very specific Arkansas. You had not written a single letter to any of the girlfriends you had made the year before, though you had jumped in a car with them at lunchtime and driven frantically to the Minuteman, a fast food restaurant devoted to hamburgers and pool tables, and you bought Hawaiian punch and French fries because that was what you bought as an American girl for lunch. Yet you would have to go back there and be assigned another football player and line up for the school bus on Friday nights wearing your short red romper, even if there was freezing rain in the forecast, and drive around with your distant friends on Friday nights, circling the Minuteman and one or two other local hangouts, endlessly boy hunting, though you didn't really comprehend that that was the purpose at the time, until finally You could ask someone to take you home, which was not really your home, but the home of a generous young couple who had invited you to live with them while you finished high school. I've nearly finished. You lived existentially that summer, in the moment, though that word would not be in your vocabulary for 4 more years. And you weren't really gathering your courage. You were in a waiting game with your parents. Would they really send you away again to the United States to live without them? Once, you might figure, could be an accident, a mistake. Twice was one time too many. 2 years in Arkansas was 1 year too many. It had been interesting at first, like people think going on a safari would be interesting. But it would not be interesting to go back, to smile at the athlete who would never call your name, to wake in the morning to windows that could not be opened because the air conditioner or the heater was running, to circle the Minuteman in some friend's ancient Impala with its huge, toothy grill, the hood ornaments like jet fighters, the entire car reminiscent of some great finned weapon. Your mother asked you one day if you were ready to leave. Leave where? Go back to Arkansas. Your stomach churned. Sure, you said, and turned from her, walking out the back door, across the African grass, to the guava tree, looking up into its slender pink limbs. Looking back, you wonder what might have happened had you taken the keys, left the compound, set out for the north and the desert, driving beyond the life they had planned. Thank you. Yeah, I think, yes, we have time for questions. I would love to talk. Yes.
Well, you reminded me of our past, because we were in Nigeria just after the
Oh, my goodness.
in Iran. So many of the things that you were talking about, just awakened old memories for us.
And what were you doing there?
That's a good question.
Well, thank you.
As a psychologist, I was invited to come and help the Nigerian people know how to deal with disturbed young people,
Ah,
how to find help and what to do, because they had no children's hospitals there.
ah,
Children were in psychiatric hospitals who were in with adults.
I see. Chat a bit in a moment. Thanks for being here. Yes.
Your brief reference to dialysis, which is peritoneal dialysis.
Yes.
Reminded me because I had gone through that too.
Ah,
And although I'm a writer, a little bit, I write poetry, what I turned to is I knew I had to do something to create, to get through this and to be different so that my life didn't end.
yes.
And so what I did was I took up classical guitar.
Oh, how marvelous.
But I think, it's just seeing the parallels. That,
Yeah.
Knowing that you have to create, you have to go on,
Absolutely.
you have to take stock of things going.
Yeah. And I think even, end-stage renal disease dialysis is a great trauma, but we meet traumas at many stages of life. right? And I think it's traumatic to be a freshman in college. I think it's about one of the scariest things that can happen, right? It's also scary to be a senior. And so I think all of these moments that the creative life is our answer, right? Creating, being part of something creative, whether it's in a group, a band, or you're writing, or you're, you're an artist, whatever. I think that it's so deep in us as human beings. It's how we hope.
And people, when I started that process, they said to me, oh, poor thing. You know, and there was a sense of pity.
Yeah.
And I just didn't understand it. I thought, it could be so much worse.
Yeah.
I could be blinded, I could be this or that.
But I feel extraordinarily privileged to have had the medical care that I had, to be to have received the medical gifts that I received, so that I have a kind of second life. Now, other questions? Yes.
Being the child of missionaries, did you find that your behavior had to be at a higher level?
My behavior had to be at a higher level? Is that what you asked? Yes, absolutely. That's why I thought that it was reasonable to ask a girl when she was 16 to leave her home and come to the U.S. alone and live with people she'd never met in a state she'd never been in, and for her to be, to arrive there, say, August 12th and start school on the 19th, and fit in and join the pep squad and be elected, to some office in her class, and then be the yearbook editor. I mean, I really wanted to be the cheerleader, but, I took every other prize I could get. And I thought that was a reasonable thing, because I had been asked to perform. Yeah, and so I wanted to be good. I wanted to do what was expected of me. And there are lots of ways in which lots of children are asked to perform. Yeah, and it's kind of hard as a parent knowing what to ask. But yeah, that was my mindset. And I loved my father. Oh, I loved my father, and he expected this of me. Yeah. Bella, did you have your hand up?
Well, yes, I cannot help identifying with a lot of things that you are saying as a Nigerian.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how you bringing out, all a lot of things that I would take for granted in the environment and the way of life, and it washes over me as really symbolic things coming from the eyes of somebody I would consider not Nigerian. Well, the way you have embraced this Nigerian concept, shows that your childhood is a very important part of anybody's life, and your experiences are they're unique, because as Nigerians, we're used to Americans or Caucasians coming in the prime of their lives,
That's
to
right.
work.
Yeah.
Maybe wives of expatriates, and then after a few years, they want to go back. They take their kids and go back.
Yeah.
But when you come to Nigeria as a child, I
Or
guess,
born there.
yes, born there, yes,
Yeah.
it grows into you.
Yeah.
A lot more than it could do. So, well, I naturally feel a kinship with everything you're saying,
Thank
the Peugeot and all that. It's still all there, we love it, and it's great, that you feel, part of this scene. But I want to ask, when you came to America as a fresh college student, or were you able to relate to other Africans at all, or throughout your years?
Didn't encounter Africans in Arkansas.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
very well.
Here's what happened. I got to the U.S. and began high school, or was in Arkansas, just during well, I mean, the civil rights movement, you know, began in the U.S. in the 50s, right? We think about it a lot in the 60s, but it began before that. So after World War II, but it was just reaching some places like Arkansas, right? I mean, the schools were just being, some high schools were just being integrated. And so what I was confronted with was the white kids and the African American kids. And I didn't belong in either group. You know, I was not welcome in the African American group. I could say, well, I'm from Nigeria. Well, they'd be, we don't care. You know, go back somewhere, sit somewhere else, go over there. And you know, the white kids were sort of my only choice, but I didn't really have any natural affinity for their culture. But I mean, that's where I tried to pass, right? It's what I looked like, it's sort of what I sounded like, so that's where I tried to pass. But it was passing. You all know the concept of passing, racial passing, right? That you usually in U.S. history we think of African Americans who passed as white, maybe color, you know, crossing the color line. It's a border crossing, yeah. So this was what was so confusing about my life. No one saw me as displaced, right? No one saw me as an exile, so I couldn't even conceptualize that myself. I only felt it as, you know, a deep break, but yeah. Jody.
Well, you say you were very dutiful because of your missionary upbringing, your sort of expectations. Do you think that your writing is a way of rebelling, and that for most people, writing is your way of rebelling?
Let's see, is that a loaded question? Well, let me just put it this way. Everyone in my family, let's see, my mother, even as a Southern Baptist, okay, my mother is ordained. She's 91. She was ordained when she was 80. My father was ordained. My sister is ordained. My brother-in-law is ordained. I'm not. Okay? Yeah. So, but I didn't have to start writing to rebel. I was born rebelling. I think I was born rebelling against this whole damn script. You know, that was like, I was clinging to that guava tree. I was holding on, you know, I was digging in like a tick. All the time that I was being groomed, you know, every day I was being dressed in my little American dresses. They itched, you know, I couldn't stand them, and put in my little American shoes and my little corrective shoes so that I would have proper arches, right? And, you know, being taught all these things, which I guess I should be grateful for, but at the time I wasn't. I was against it all. Yeah. So I was dutiful. I was a good student. But I doubted my spirituality, right? Because I knew I wasn't really completely into this whole thing of being the good daughter, of doing this whole thing. Yeah. So writing, is writing how I'm rebelling? I guess it might be the latest manifestation of my rebellion. Yeah. It's really, I would say, though, that writing is where I'm celebrating my life. It's where I'm being most alive. Writing is living. It's where my energy is most focused, my brain is most alive, and I'm the most present to myself, to the world, and whatever you want to call the divine. You know, writing is it. Yeah. Basketball, writing. Yeah.
Do you feel that you have always known who you were honestly, although you hid it, I assume, from the way you've been talking, from everybody else? Or did you hide it from yourself as well?
I think I knew who I was as a girl. There's a moment in Gods of Noonday when I'm entering the 8th grade, and I said, that's when I could no longer tell the difference between the truth and a lie. So I think I knew who I was until I was really, really compelled to conform, to become an American girl. and I was in boarding school. And then I think I really, coming to the US, I suppressed a lot, right? And I think for a long time, I really didn't know who I was, even though I was performing, right? I was getting a PhD, I was having a baby, I was getting a tenure track job, I was publishing books, and I was getting sick. Yeah. And when I crashed, right, there was something in me that wanted to live again, that wanted to come back. And in fact, I'll just read this sentence. This is from I love to read from the end. This book goes in circles, so you can read the end, it doesn't matter. Let's see. In a dream, this is toward the very end of this book, I am in the US in a car with my husband, and we stop at a kind of fair or community get-together. People are displaying valuable antiques. After looking about, I decide to display my own object, even though it is plain and seems unremarkable. It is a box I buried in an earlier dream, out under the guava tree in a Beaumachon. A small, dingy white box with drawers and pulls. I set the box down and look at it on the table, and I think, okay, there it is. And I know now that the box is my calabash, my story, my body from Nigeria. And it is my essential self, my inner head, however flawed and wounded, however dislocated and forgotten. I have no choice but to claim it. Something inside me is waiting to be born. It is my own Ivory Coast. It is the promise of my salvation. So, that's why I say writing the memoir is it's how I found myself again, and maybe how I really found myself for the first time.
Christina, you had a question. I think we have time for one more.
I was just wondering, I apologize for arriving a little late, because I haven't read the book yet, but it sounds like you grew up, I had a friend who grew up in Lagos, partly, her dad, he was Nigerian, he worked at an oil company, and she wasn't in a compound or protected, and she said she remembers driving, they had to leave in a hurry, and that, I think 70s or 80s, when there was a lot of war and violence, and she remembers seeing bodies, 9 or 10, and seeing bodies lying in the street. And then a couple days later, they were still there. And her mother would say, don't look, and she was, that guy's still there, And but I was wondering about the compound. It sounds like it was kind of sheltered, and also, did you ever have any thoughts growing up, especially during that era of turmoil of being a missionary family, and a missionary community, in a country that already had its own very deep religious traditions? I mean, did that bother you as a kid?
No, it didn't bother me as a kid. I didn't have the kind of critical awareness. I hadn't yet studied post-colonial theory, right?
No, I would have noticed that at that age. So
Yeah.
I would have noticed something like that.
But my father didn't preach in the churches. All the churches I ever went to had Nigerian pastors, and of course I saw traditional Nigerian faith practices all the time, and a lot of those were mixed up, right?
Yeah.
So that you would see sort of traditional faith practices emerge in the church, but I didn't have the critical apparatus to wonder about that
Because
when
it
I was 8 years
already-
old.
It was there was no conflict, it was just all kind of, it sounded like you saw these two traditions.
Well, I mean, the church had been in, the church, I guess the Portuguese were the first people, first Europeans to arrive in Lagos or on the coast. And so the church had been introduced, at least on the coast, for hundreds of years. And in many ways, Nigerians had made it their own. I think something that's really important to me, to think about when we do a kind of post-colonial critique and we think about the church and what role it's played in Nigeria, I think, but I'm not going to ask Nelson Mandela if he thinks he has false consciousness because he's a Christian. I mean, that's kind of up to Nelson Mandela, right? Or Desmond Tutu. It's, there are great many Muslims in Nigeria, right? Half the country's Muslim, and that's also a religion that has come into the country in relatively recent history. If you look at the history of the ancient history of what's now the country of Nigeria. As far as, yes, the compounds were a relatively sheltered place, that's true. Though once the war broke out, we were on the roads, we were stopped by, people with weapons all the time. But I think I did grow up with a real naivete about the world that I was in, and that's why I did a lot of research for this book, because I wanted to know what was really going on. Thanks for your question.
So I think I have a gift here for you, Elaine. I
Oh.
just have to find it. If I bring it with me. Oh, I know where it is. I put it here because last week I forgot it.
I want to thank everybody. I want to give our URI present, thank Dave Ledoux, to Elaine, so she can wear it. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you very much, everyone. Elaine is happy to sign books. She'll sit out in the hall there so as not to
Let me
be
just
congested.
say
Yes.
that, it's got a kind of small head.
Is that all right?
This is really great because in Nigeria, you always get clothes.
Oh,
right?
so this is
Yes,
good.
this is very Nigerian custom. You just didn't know it.
Good. That's great. Thank you, everyone. Will you